So thank you to all of you for your opening remarks. It is absolutely humbling to be surrounded by friends, colleagues, mentors, mentees. I've learned something from almost every single person in this room, which is a really rare opportunity to be able to say that. When we were choosing our keynote speaker for today's events, we decided that we couldn't have just one, and we needed two. But even when we came down to two, the list was long. It's interesting because the choices were obvious. Every month, literally every month for the past year and a half, when I've seen my colleague, mentor, and friend, Professor Michael Link, who's a pediatric oncologist at Stanford, he would say, hey, Emmy, how's it going? What are you up to? We need to get John Seffrin to come and speak. And so month after month, he would tell me, we need to get John Seffrin to speak. Why do we need John Seffrin to speak? This is a man who probably does need no introduction, so I'm going to keep it brief, but he has really led the American cancer effort for the last over 20 years in the private sector. He was a chief executive at the American Cancer Society for the last 23 years, stepping down from that role in 2015. As many of you know, the American Cancer Society is the leading philanthropic force in cancer in the United States. It's been amazing to see how the Cancer Society has moved from their Cancer Atlas, which I think almost everybody either has a physical copy of or has looked at on the web, to actually in the recent years making a strong commitment to global health. He's a past president of the Union on International Cancer Control, and we have other past presidents of UICC and board members here, an international organization that focuses on cancer. And more than anything, he is an inspired and committed leader, being invited to be a presidential advisor on this particular topic. So with that, I want to open up the stage to Dr. Seffrin. I want to thank him for making the trek out from springtime Atlanta to what looks like fall San Francisco, and we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ami, for the introduction and for the invitation. And I'm just delighted to be with you this morning. And let me say at the outset, you're about something very important. Most of you I haven't had the privilege and pleasure to meet personally. A few of you, Mary Gospodarowicz and Ben Anderson, I got to see this morning. Two people I haven't seen for a while, two people I admire, two people who've dedicated their lives to being great clinicians and cancer researchers. But I feel like I know you more than I really do because I'm very much aware of your collective impact of what you're doing, and it's making such a difference. And so I want to thank you personally as John Seffrin, the husband of Carol, who's celebrating her 12th anniversary post-breast cancer, a disease that if she had been diagnosed when I first got involved with the American Cancer Society, she would have had to have had a radical Holstead mastectomy, complete removal of the lymph nodes, lymphedema as a result of it, and a 50% chance of being alive in 5 years if she had gotten breast cancer in America in 1972. Thankfully, she didn't get breast cancer that year. She did a number of years later, and I went with her to the hospital, and she had a lumpectomy, and it was the day before Thanksgiving, and the next day we had Thanksgiving dinner at home alone for the first time in our 50 years next week of marriage. So what I wanted to say today is thank you for what you're doing and remind you that we are at an unprecedented place in our understanding of cancer, both at the molecular level and how it exists as an epidemic in a population, and what to do about it. And that's why your efforts are so important, particularly as we think about the entire globe, the world. We're in an unprecedented place because we can talk and no one's saying, what have they been smoking? We can talk about how do we bring cancer under control as a major public health problem, first in the United States, in all probability, in other developed countries, but all around the world earlier in the 21st century. Now just think about that concept when many of us, longer in the tooth, got involved with cancer work. That would not have appeared to have been a prudent statement. We might have said, we dream of someday conquering cancer, but to say, how do we get rid of it earlier in the 21st century presumes that we have evidence that we could do that if we do the right things. And I believe we could. So we can document cancer in dinosaurs and Egyptian mummies. So cancer has been a part of dinosaurs and Homo sapiens for millennia, thousands of years. And you're saying, John, that maybe if we do the right things, we could bring it under control as a major public health problem? I believe that could happen. And let me say that having had the privilege of being the CEO of the American Cancer Society, the largest voluntary health organization in the world, who has the audacity to have a mission statement that says the American Cancer Society is the nationwide community-based voluntary health organization dedicated to eliminating cancer as a major public health problem by preventing it, by saving lives from it, by reducing suffering through research, education, advocacy, and service. Every marketer says it's too long, too many concepts, but don't tell our 2.5 million volunteers or our 6,000 professional staff. They all love it because we basically say we're involved in everything related to cancer. And I'll say more about that in a minute. So let me start by saying what's the evidence, and of course we don't have time to go over all the evidence, but I'm proud to say that early on in my tenure as the CEO, I brought together some of the smartest people I could find in the world and said, I want to know what's possible to achieve. A guy by the name of Phil Cole, who's a cancer epidemiologist at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, who trained at Harvard, got up and said, John, you can't set a goal like a 50% reduction in cancer mortality because we don't have any evidence that we've been able to turn the curve of death rates. So this was in the early 1990s. He called me up a few months later and said, John, I was wrong. And he published with us the first paper showing a downturn in age-standardized cancer mortality rates in America. A few weeks later, the National Cancer Institute published a similar article showing the same results. What you're looking at, of course, is the downturn. We now have a quarter century, year over year over year, downturn in age-standardized cancer mortality rates in the United States. And the blue bar graphs are showing the deaths averted. These data are dated, the better data. The next slide shows over 1 million deaths were averted between those years. That's now above 1.5 million. We think about 1.7 million deaths have been averted as a result of the progress in cancer control. But I think of it as proof of concept. We're showing that we can. Here, all my career, the death rates in America were going up, and now they're going down, and they're continuing to go down. So basically, we published, the American Cancer Society published 3 years ago, I think it was, the first ever cancer facts and figures on survivorship. Well, when the organization got started a little over 100 years ago, you didn't have to have cancer facts and figures on survivorship because there wasn't very much survivorship at all. But now there are 28 million cancer survivors in the world. 50% of the 28 million live in a country with 5% of the world's population here in the United States. So, what can we do to continue the progress? And these are 3 really big, tough buckets, but they're real. We have to redouble research. I haven't had time to check, but I think for the first time in all of history, just to give you, Dick Rauscher used to tell me, who was the director of our research program, former head of the National Cancer Institute, he said, John, you know, cancer research is a building block phenomenon, and we're standing on the shoulders of those who preceded us, and we're doing more work. And his point was, of course, we don't have all the answers, but we have so many more answers than we used to, and if we continue to stoke the engines of discovery, we'll have even more answers coming more quickly. In 2015, not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 new targeted therapies were approved for the treatment of multiple myeloma by the FDA. So we have to redouble research. We have to promote prevention into public policy everywhere. And I'll comment more on that in a minute, but bottom line is, as I think you know, we now know how to prevent about half of all human cancer during a normal human lifespan. What an opportunity to improve the quality and the length of people's lives. And then, of course, we have to provide access to health care. As Alan was pointing out, in some parts of the world, it's abysmal, but it's fixable. We worked on this problem, and it was quite controversial. I went to my board of directors after and said, we're not going to make our 2015 goals, and here's what we have to do to make them. And then I said to them, access to quality care is the only one of these that could keep us from ever reaching our 2015 goals. And I said, I'm not going to go alone, but we, the American Cancer Society, we're not experts on healthcare delivery. However, we're the largest voluntary health organization in the world with a brand that people trust, and we have resources. Shouldn't we show leadership? And 3 months later, they passed a resolution for us to step out. This is long before the Affordable Care Act even had a name. This was in 2006 and 2007. But it changed the world, because what we did was we went to the American public and said, we want you to see the broken healthcare system through the cancer lens. And so we had real people. I remember Raina, this beautiful young African-American woman from Detroit, who called our call center. And she said, I've got cancer, and I have insurance, and my husband, who's a postman, has insurance, but neither will cover the treatment my doctor says I have to survive. And she said, I can't afford to die. I have a 4-year-old child. So we were able to help her get the care she needed, but we also were able to start a health insurance assistance service back then, and we put on TV for a whole year and spent our entire advertising budget, which often goes for fundraising, to tell that story about how people were lacking in access. We also had the only data showing one very important, profound thing, and we said, you know, the red hash line is someone with stage 1 colorectal cancer without insurance or on Medicaid, and the blue line right above it is someone with stage 2 colorectal cancer who has private insurance. So it's not just late diagnosis in our system, it was actually people getting poor care because they didn't have the right card. So we stepped out on saying we need to fix the healthcare system and we need to fix ourselves. And so I went to the board later and said, you know, we're saving 350 more lives for cancer per day than we were in 1991 when the death rates first started to go down. It's now 500 a day as I speak to you in 2016, but I showed them data where it could be 1,000 a day. I'm talking just about in America now. And so they agreed to go through a transformation of our organization, which was coming up on its 100th birthday. We had a number of initiatives, which I, of course, don't have time to go into now, but we fundamentally changed our platform because I said we'll never get to 1,000 lives a day with our current platform. And I'm very proud to say that the Society has not only implemented all of these interventions, but materially completed most of them. And as a result of that, I'm very optimistic about the future in terms of at least the United States and where we'll go with reducing the big toll of cancer in terms of a public health issue. I had the privilege of being a part of the official United States delegation to the first ever high-level meeting of the United Nations on non-communicable diseases in 2011. And I want to share this with you because it's so important, and I think Beverly and Alan both alluded to it, and that is, you know, we have to collaborate, and we have to get attention, and we have to shine a bright light on what we're trying to get done. So we go into New York, to the UN. Let me just quickly share with you, there have been only about 25 high-level meetings of the UN since the end of World War II. So the high-level meeting, all these terms have spatial meaning, just like in science, terms have spatial meaning. And a high-level meeting is one where all heads of state are invited to be there and are expected to be there, and they cannot send a substitute unless the substitute's empowered to make a decision. So out of the 25 high-level meetings, only one had ever dealt with a health issue, and that was HIV/AIDS in 2001, and it changed the world. So in 2011, non-communicable diseases were put on the menu, put out there. Remember, cancer and non-communicable diseases were not mentioned, not even once, in the Millennium Development Goals of the UN, coming into Y2K, the new millennium. HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria were all on the list, as they should have been, but not cancer and not non-communicable diseases. Well, cancer alone will kill in the world 3 times as many people as HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. So the meeting occurred. It was a 13-page political declaration, and that has spatial meaning. They passed a political declaration in 2001 with HIV/AIDS, and it said basically 4 things in my reading. 1, cancer at the forefront. Cancer and non-communicable diseases will be the #1 health, disease, and disability challenge of the 21st century. Now just think about that, ponder that for a moment. How important is your work? Nothing's going to trump this. You know, bird flu might come one year and so forth, and there may be a problem, but nothing will be more important from the standpoint of public health, disease, and disability than cancer and non-communicable diseases. The second thing it said, and they actually use this phrase, we have a number of best buys. And as Alan said, let's get a treatment. As one of my friends said, the best test for colorectal cancer is the one you get. and so we have a number of best buys. And I think for people that have been involved like I have for 4 decades, you think back when you didn't have knowledge, you didn't have experience, and you didn't have the tools. We have a number of best buys that could be implemented anywhere in the world for $3 to $5 per person per year that work. The third thing it said is that based on the World Economic Forum and a Harvard University School of Public Health publication, you no longer can decouple non-communicable diseases and cancer from economic development, economic output. So when we announced, American Cancer Society announced the first ever 20% decline in age-standardized cancer mortality rates in America, we could also say that yields, published data in the economic literature, that yields the American people a $10 trillion value. So economic development. So if we sit on our hands, if we're willing to accept the status quo, if we're willing to accept incremental improvement, there will be a $47 trillion loss in economic output in the world over the next 2 decades. Whew. 47 trillion is just a little bit more than I can quite comprehend, but I know it's a heck of a lot of money. It's enough to eliminate $2 a day poverty in the world as we know it today for a half century. It's 75% of the global domestic product in 2010. And the fourth thing that political declaration said, Ban Ki-moon, I was there, I heard him say it in his oral testimony, we can do something about this tsunami of non-communicable diseases and cancer, and I believe. So if it's a fact, I say it as a fact. If I don't have all the data, then I say, here's what I believe. I believe cancer has already become the #1 cause of death in the world. I think back when I was in graduate school, malaria was the #1 cause of death in the world. But it's somewhat academic. It's now a huge tumor burden for the world. And it's up to us to do something about it. But Ban Ki-moon said, we can make a big difference, but we can't do it without engaging the private sector. And that brings in Alan's comment about philanthropy, but it also brings in partnerships and working with the commercial sector in order to get maximum results. Just a quick word or two about tobacco, because you can't really talk about cancer and reducing human suffering and avoiding premature mortality anywhere in the world today without talking a little bit about tobacco. You see a map here that comes out of our tobacco atlas, different from our cancer atlas. But the bottom line is that tobacco killed, as you know it in America, it's 1 in every 3 cancer deaths as a result of exposure to combusted tobacco products. But it killed 100 million people last century. It's on course to kill 1 billion people this century. The world has never seen in recorded history anything of that magnitude. But the good news is we have lots of good ways to stop that from happening. Now think about this. We have the first ever public health treaty in all of history. There's only one, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, now ratified by not 1, not 10, not 100, about 180 countries. And it is full of protocols that, if implemented, we know reduce the number of kids who get addicted and help people who are addicted, adults, stop. And we've proven this in many parts of the world, some areas better than the United States, but we've had great progress here in the United States with the lowest tobacco prevalence rates in youth and adults since we've been keeping records since the original Surgeon General's report in 1964. Interestingly, this too comes from the Tobacco Atlas. It's interesting that China now consumes 38% of all the combusted tobacco products in the world. That's more than the next 4 countries, heaviest consuming countries that include Russia and the United States combined. But the good news is, with philanthropy from people like former Mayor Michael Bloomberg and from the Gates Foundation, we now have active programs all around the world that are getting results. And Africa is the last continent we're going into for tobacco control when the prevalence rates are still low. We think it's going to be easier to keep them low than to get them down when they're high because of the addiction process. So there's a lot to be optimistic about, but you and I, and organizations like yours and mine and others, need to talk about how do we break down silos, how do we come together, how do we maximize. I have put in writing, I believe it is a moral imperative. It's one thing when we didn't know what to do. It's another thing when we have armamentarium, many arrows in our quiver that, if used, would reduce human suffering to the extent that it would. And just in America, and we have more problems, and we could spend all day talking about what's not right with America. But the truth is we've made progress not just in one group, but virtually all groups, African Americans, Caucasians, Hispanics, Asian, Pacific Islanders, and so forth. We also know and have published data showing how many more deaths could be averted if we just got everybody, okay, to get the same outcomes as the best educated in the United States. And you're looking at 40,000 avoidable deaths in African Americans, 160,000 in white non-Hispanics, 13,000 in Hispanics, and so forth. So, now, I found, going into Washington on a fairly regular basis for 4 decades, even more frequently in the last couple of decades, Sometimes, because many of us grew up and are interested in and comfortable with data and evidence, and it's really, really, really important. But there are some times when it's better to have a qualitative statement and then be prepared to, what'd you say? You could prevent virtually half of all human cancer during a normal human lifespan? Tell me more about that. And then we can begin to show the impact of tobacco and lack of access, et cetera. But if we just prevent the preventable, treat the treatable, fix the fixable within the healthcare system, and provide state-of-the-art care and palliation to those that are not preventable or curable, think how the world would change overnight. Think about the amount of human suffering and avoidable premature deaths we could avoid. So how do we get there? Well, you have to have many meetings like this, and so I congratulate you all for giving of your time and being here. We have to have innovation, but basically, if you pushed me, I would say you need three things. You need resources, you need collaboration, and you need policy change. They're all doable. Are any of them easy? No. But are they doable? The answer is yes. And we have to put our own feet to the fire, because it's tempting sometimes with everything else we have to do is to say, well, that's just too steep of a hill to climb. Policy change, I'll just take them in reverse order for a minute. Policy change. You're looking at a picture, a real picture taken of our celebration on the Hill in Washington. We had asked for a meeting with the then Speaker, Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House, and repeatedly were denied a meeting because he was too busy in his schedule. However, he has this special office, and you've probably seen it on camera when they go in. He has this incredible view of the mall, the Washington Monument and the mall and the reflecting pool. So when he saw our 6,000 volunteers all in blue shirts and saw tents from each state, including Illinois, where he was from, he came down to visit us, as opposed to us going to visit him. All I'm saying is that policy change is possible, and perhaps I couldn't come up today with a better example than the fact that America finally passed the Affordable Care Act. Is it perfect? Heck no. But it gives us a chance that I at one point thought I would never see in my career or my lifetime, and that is to build out a good and compassionate healthcare system, which we, of course, did not have in the past. Collaboration. One person told me once that they defined that as an unnatural human act. And Alan and I and others were talking. No, Stanford, University of California, San Francisco, et cetera. We stepped forward with former President George Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara and created something called the National Dialogue on Cancer 15 or so years ago, and now called Sea Change. We just said, we need to come together. All three sectors, the private sector, the governmental sector, and the non-governmental sector, and work together more. And we did that, and it's made a difference in my opinion. But collaboration is easy to say, it's a little tougher to pull off, and we need to do more of that because there's power in numbers and there's power when you have consensus on messages. And then the third thing is resources. And you say, oh boy, all you have to do is turn on the TV and listen to the political debates, and there's obviously no money. Not true. Not true. Not true. Not true. We have 3 times as much money in our health care industrial complex as we have in our military industrial complex in the United States of America. So before we even get a new dollar, which we should get, and I think we can and will get eventually, just if we were stewards of I'm talking now America, but it probably applies many other places in the world, if we just were better stewards of the resources we have at our disposal, we could get phenomenally different results. So America may not stand alone, but we clearly know that we have problems in America, both overtreatment and undertreatment. Undertreatment and overtreatment, and both lead to poorer outcomes. So we can, I think, do a lot more. Well, let me just say, it's a privilege to share some thoughts with you. I believe strongly that if we do the right things, we can bring cancer under control as a major public health problem in the 21st century. That's a big statement to make when you look at the data and you see it's become essentially the #1 cause of death in the world. But we now have knowledge, experience, some resources, and arrows in our quiver. This is a very small, short list of things, from the mapping of the human genome to targeted therapies, to We built an organization called the American Cancer Action Network. It's a 501c4 as opposed to a 501c3, so we were able to do a lot more advocacy than some of our sister organizations. But we have these things, and they've proven to be effective. I'll just conclude by saying I plan to dedicate the rest of my life, now that I'm a retiree, become a professor of practice at Indiana University School of Public Health, to seeing what I can do to see that we advance, that we, it is said that the human being is the only animal that both laughs and cries. And that's because we somehow know the difference between what is and what ought to be. And people like you and others are very special human beings because you work every day to try to change what is into what could be, which is a world with a lot less cancer and a lot less suffering and a lot brighter future. And together, let's make that happen. May God and your good work speed that day. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that, John, and thank you for dedicating the rest of your career and life to this problem. We have time for a few questions. So we'll have folks running around with some microphones. If you can just raise your hand if you have a question for John. 0 questions, crystal clear, right? Yeah. Okay. We have one over there.
I'm Saleh Rahman, I'm from Florida, and my question is, we see in the global health area that tobacco companies, those who are working in particular in the industrialized countries, they're shifting their target in low-income, middle-income countries, particularly vulnerable population, women and children. And policy-wise, what should we do, like particularly those who are practicing here and have some kind of global connection? A little bit of insight, if you can shed some lights on that. And one more question. Second question would be, the data you showed about mortality of cancer, we know that it would be top all over the world. However, the cancer treatment also getting better and better. So disability adjusted life years, which is a measure of disease burden, is also tremendously influencing that cancer could be one of the top burden of the disease all over the world. And we don't see much discussion on that. If you comment on that, I will appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, 2 very good points and quite different ones. We published with Livestrong a few years ago and released it at the UICC Global Cancer Conference on basically the actual cost and adjusted life years of cancer compared to other diseases, and I'd be happy to share those data with all of you, but it dwarfs all other disease processes. And obviously it's because it tends to strike at the prime of life, so it's both its impact on the community, the family, and economics, and lost years of life is horrific. On the tobacco issue, I gave a plenary speech at the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco a year ago in February, and I made the comment that we have to understand that the tobacco industry is the #1 abuser of children that leads to death around the world. And there's no question but what their efforts to target the most vulnerable is there. And what we have to do is have the resolve to come together, because no one organization has the resources to fight the largesse of the tobacco industry, and to implement the protocols of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. The good news is that many times that's how I got involved with cancer work, is my interest in children getting addicted to tobacco when I was a junior professor many years ago. But then we knew so very little what to do. So it was almost trial and error. Well, now we know the big markers and the things that can work. And Australia, Canada, many other places have done better than we have in the US. But it is important, particularly in the middle and low income countries, that we reach out and try to help them stave off the rapacious way in which the tobacco industry puts profits over people's lives. Appreciate those comments and agree with the points that you're making. Any other questions?
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind going back to that slide where you talked about the amount of education that people have.
Uh-huh.
What I wasn't sure was, were you talking about education that people have in general or education about cancer? Because
No, I should have clarified that. It was the, is that the header slide? Oh. It was the level of education, whether they graduated from high school versus graduated from college. And it's a powerful predictor of health outcomes, we have found. Got to be on there someplace. I think I missed it. I'll be happy to share that slide with you, but it is level of education.
So the follow-up is, do you know, it's pretty hard to change the level of education of people all throughout the world. Is anybody looking at whether you can, the question is whether, is anybody looking at whether you can make a big difference by changing the level of people's education about cancer? Maybe you can't change all of their education.
Yeah. Our experience and what research we've done shows that what we often refer to as the laggards, those least apt to comply, need a high-touch approach. So it's tougher, they're tougher to reach, but we have found that then you have to have a more intense version. And one example that comes to my mind that I gave a talk on recently is some of the work that Ed Partridge is doing at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, in terms of outreach to underserved and poor communities. And their effort is to train indigenous people, local people, because there's trust there. And so then if my next door neighbor or the woman who does my hair or my barber says, you know, you really do need to get, comply with the American Cancer Society's recommendations on colorectal cancer screening, that sort of thing. You're more apt than through advertising on television, as an example, or those kinds of things. But it's tough. But what we wanted to show was what is possible if we had the same outcomes, and level of education both means, obviously, probably their amount of knowledge about the importance of it, but also their capacity to take advantage of the services.
Hi, John. My name is Pat Lair. I'm the director of the Indiana University Simon Cancer Center. I just want to let you know that I came out here just to welcome you to Indiana.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions for you. One is, can I buy you a beer sometime? Or maybe red wine, because it's healthier.
Yeah, either one.
Either one would be fine. Maybe you can reflect a little bit, I'm not sure the right way of phrasing it, but some of the failures, if you will, something you wish you would have done, or what could the ACS done in terms of linking organizations together on global health. I think one of the concerns that when I talk to people about this is that it reflects our political movement, in which some of the politicians want to build walls, and they say, we have problems here in the United States, why worry about other countries? And I think some of our societies here, at least in the States, I think feel similarly. So what, if you could do it over again, or what lessons learned can you share with us about building bridges across those boundaries here?
Well, I think not only, and thank you for the question, and it's a tough one, but I've been pretty tough on myself about, okay, yes, but if you had it to do over. And so let me say a couple things. I believe for not just the reduction in unnecessary cancer mortality or for public health, but for economic development and world peace, we have to build more bridges. And for just about any institution in America that I have worked with or have awareness of should not be given a pass to have the insular notion, well, we just have to take care of Wayne County. We just have to take care of Indiana. We just have to take care of Stanford. I think there's an obligation to say, what are you doing in order to? So I once made the comment, if we solve the cancer problem in the U.S. and the rest of the world it would be a pretty unsatisfying victory, and it would lessen the quality of health for Americans. So I've thought back, and it was in large part, not totally, but in large part, our cancer prevention study #1, done in the 50s, that went into the original Surgeon General's report in 1964. There were other studies, but and then of course we had the first ever, it's considered to have been, first Surgeon General's report in 1964 has been by the Institute of Medicine declared the most significant, most impactful government agency report relative to health in all of history. But it took us years to do some of the kinds of things we should have done. Once it was said, smoking is causally related, not associated, causally related to lung cancer in men, and I think it's a direct quote, we should have begun to do more research on how to reach people, understand the whole problem of addiction, understand how to prevent it from happening, and we did programs, but it was too little. So I'm proud of the progress in that area we've made. Now 51 years since the original Surgeon General's report, 52 years, but we're not as far along as we should have been if we had immediately said, aha, now we know for sure, let's find out what it is we need to do about it. Now we have those answers. And that's why I think it's a moral imperative that we implement the things that we know will work. I sat on the advisory committee to the Surgeon General in the Bush II administration, and we made a strong recommendation to increase the federal excise tax on tobacco by $2. The Surgeon General mentioned it one time in public, and it was never heard of again. So that's where we have to then take our academic hat off a bit and put our citizen hat on a bit and say, you know, this is not right. There were things we can do that will really make a difference. And basically, I mean, you can argue about the fact that it's a regressive tax and some of those esoteric things, and that's true. But when you think about the public health benefit and then the creation of badly needed revenue. And by the way, the gentleman from Florida, here's an so we didn't do everything right, and we often took too long to do what we needed to do. But I had a call a few years ago, and from our Florida division, which has always been a bellwether division, very good division of the American Cancer Society. And so the Truth Campaign essentially started in Florida, and it was working. So fewer and fewer kids are getting addicted. And the Truth Campaign was pretty hard-hitting. I mean, we had a fierce debate at the National Board about some, because they had body bags outside the Philip Morris headquarters in New York and things that some people took offense at. But it was working. So what does the state legislature in Florida do? Defund the program. Defunded the Truth Campaign. Well, everybody knows getting the legislature to vote to put more money into that kind of a program is like pulling teeth. So I get a call from the CEO, would you help us? Would you invest $1 million into Florida? We want to change the state constitution. Florida has changed their state constitution now twice related to tobacco issues, and now they have to put the money in the Truth Campaign. It trumps the legislature. And I think it's the only time this has happened in our country, but it shows you what can happen if we're willing to reach across, build bridges. Florida couldn't do that on their own. But with the help of all the other divisions and the national, they got that done, and it's made a heck of a difference.
Hello, thanks. So from Saudi, my name is Arnold Wayne. I come from the Pacific Ocean, country where you probably put a dot to it. I have Papua New Guinea, but the neighborhood countries, small countries like a country that made of 5,000 population, made of a country. But nonetheless, my points are that being in my country, we have a country where the government doesn't have any much of policy on cancers. Back in 2001, where when HIV/AIDS and malaria and stuff like that were picking on the rise, the country changed from Department of Ministry of Health and Ministry of Health and HIV/AIDS. So cancer is basically very down on the scale. But same, the cancer incidents have been increasing and picking up. First, like cervical cancer, and then the breast cancer is picking up recently. What I found in terms of the government policies that the international financiers kind of pouring money on malaria, HIV/AIDS, and things like this, and then they skew up the whole government policy on health. So at that level of the national level or international level, how much control, how much input cancer does have, in these kind of government policies, and for smaller countries or small income countries, especially typical case in my country or in my region, Pacific. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, and you raise a good point, and it's, the problems and the tribulations, let me count the ways. What I would say is be bold and reach out and ask for help where it can be done. And let me give you a concrete example that I know a little bit about. I've sat on the board of the Tobacco-Free Kids, the National Center for Tobacco-Free Kids, which is based in Washington, but they now have programs all around the world. And because of the generosity and vision of Michael Bloomberg, we did a study a number of years ago, at least a decade ago, but I said, let's look at how much money is being put into tobacco control around the world, outside of North America, Canada, and the United States, and Europe. And it was something like a whopping $2 million for tobacco control in all the rest of the world. Well, now, Michael Bloomberg has invested over $500 million, $600 million over the past 8 years. So don't hesitate to make contacts with like Tobacco-Free Kids and other agencies and say, we need help. And because, as you point out, these problems are pervasive. So cancer is a big deal everywhere anyone lives. Well, thank you all for your attention. It's been great to be with you today.